This election is tighter than predicted, certainly back when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, which the man who replaced him today happily pointed out.
This will be a close election. That is not something I think anyone was writing 2 months ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago.
But the closeness of this contest means that whoever does win will again face a Senate they do not control. A Senate where the casting votes could be in the hands of people like Clive Palmer, the mining magnate, spending a record $50 million or more to make himself a senator. And then there's, of course, Pauline Hanson, also in the Senate. Her One Nation party could, in fact, gain another senator or two, even though journalists like writing her off. In fact, Hanson today had a brilliant response to one of them. Just this morning, Deb Knight, co-host of Channel 9's Struggling Today show.
The latest news poll, it shows support for One Nation collapsing to just 4%, on par now with Clive Palmer's party. I suppose in light of all the things you've faced, all the scandals, all that's been going on, can you really blame people for having their doubts about One Nation and considering Clive over you?
Deb, in the last election, we were at 1.3% in 2016. The polls are indicating 4%. The essential poll has got us at 6.6%. I've actually gone up since the last election. Unlike your show, Deb, since you've actually taken over, you've actually gone down in your viewership. So should you hand over your job or should we bring Carl back?
She's sharp. And also in the Senate, hoping to share that balance of power, is Senator Cory Bernardi, head of the Australian Conservatives, who joins me now. Cory, it's great to see you again. How do you think the Senate will look after Saturday? Will it be a break on the Labor government, do you think?
Well, I certainly hope it will. I join with you, Andrew. I expect Labor will win, and that becomes more important in the Senate about who's going to sit on that crossbench. We do know there's going to be a couple from the former Xenophon team still there. Pauline Hanson will be there and I'll be there, but the rest of it is up for grabs. And you've just got to make sure that people who are going to be holding a very important position are going to apply principle, are going to be consistent. They're not going to flip-flop. It's not going to be about ego and headlines. And that's the real challenge facing the Australian people.
Well, it's hard to know how it's all going to line up, as you say. You know, we get to see the composition. But give us some hope. Do you see much opposition in the coming Senate to Labor's global warming agenda above all?
Andrew, I wish I could give you more hope. Now, I'm not for changing on this. I've been consistent for a very long time. But what we've seen from many other players on the crossbench is that they will say one thing and then do another. They then might change their mind a third or fourth time. They can be bought off. They preach, you know, budget austerity, and yet they vote for budget rises. We saw one party, you know, One Nation, say they're opposed to the global warming scare, and yet they voted for an emissions intensity scheme, which is effectively a tax on weed whackers and lawn mowers and tractors, saying it had nothing to do with climate change because they hadn't read the policy. We know that there are others there that really haven't got a clue what they're voting on or can be bought off. So I don't hold out that much hope. It just is going to depend on the final composition. But I can guarantee you this, Andrew. If the Australian Conservatives are elected in any Senate positions, we will say what we mean, we will do what we say, and we will apply principle to every single decision that we make. And I think that's the one thing that's been lacking in politics in recent times.
Well, of course, you can't do anything about blocking Labor's global warming plans if the Liberals cave. I mean, much depends, doesn't it, on what the Liberals will conclude from any loss. Was this a global warming referendum and they should bow before the wind? Or has, in fact, the race tightened precisely because Labor overestimated the global warming attraction and played its cards too obviously and too loudly, if I can mangle the metaphor?
Yeah. Look, Andrew, full marks to Scott Morrison here. I think he's campaigned very well, and he deserves the authority that comes with either winning or coming a close second as Prime Minister under very difficult circumstances. But I think the Liberal Party's future is going to be determined by who remains in the party room. if you get rid of some of the lefty trolls who have been undermining the core ethos of the Liberal Party, and if you manage to keep Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott and some other people who are interested in upholding the standards that the party once cherished, then I think it's got some hope. But if Tony Abbott loses his seat, if Peter Dutton loses his seat, if the people that are left are the New South Wales factional warriors who inhabit the safer seats and really see more Greens or Labor in blue drag, then I think the party's in a world of trouble. But that's why the main game, I've got to tell you, is going to be in the Senate. It's where the Australian people can truly shape the government of the day, and we can get better policy outcomes, things that are in the national interest rather than just the short-term political interest, if they do it right.
Why do you think Clive Palmer has been successful in scooping up 4 to 5% of the Conservative vote?
Because you're spending $10 million for each percent of it, or thereabouts. Look, there's a very unhappy cohort out there. We know that in the Australian public. They don't want to vote for the blue team or the red team or the green team, and so they're looking elsewhere. And a lot of them want to stick it to the government as hard as they possibly can, and so they look to either the rhetoric of some of the inflammatory parties that are grabbing headlines and just mouthing grievances, or they look to Clive Palmer because he's on their screens and in their face every day. The real challenge, of course, is to cut through all the palaver, cut through the headline grabbing and the screeching and the self-aggrandisement, and have a look at the policy mix. Now, I don't mind saying that Clive Palmer's clearly visited the Australian Conservatives website. He's grabbed a few of our policies and he's mixed them up with a few conspiracy theories and some bad economics, he's generated this big yellow advertising machine. We haven't had the scandals. We've got our candidates are too credible to get the headlines and the scandals that others have had, Andrew. Our policy mix is not inflammatory. It's consistent. It's principled. And I just hope that the Australian public, it's going to be really interesting whether they can look through the veneer and have a look at the policies that really can shape an outcome in Australia. I hope they support us because I think we've got the solutions the country needs.
But have you been drowned out a bit by Pauline Hanson on the one hand, as a long-established brand and has got her own constituency, and then Clive Palmer at the other end of the scale, sort of $50 million of yelling publicity? You've probably got, what, 1/50th of that. And also, of course, you've got the Liberals now back under a more conservative leader. Has all that sort of conspired against you?
Of course, it's not working in our interest. I'm happy the Liberal Party has a more conservative leader, but we do know that, you can't really trust the Liberal Party or any of the major parties. They'll pursue political expediency. But, I'm backing Scott Morrison in. Sure, Clive Palmer has blitzed the field in an advertising sense. And as I say, the reactionaries, those who manage to grab the headlines because of, they say something that's inflammatory or they say something that's inane, we don't want to compete with that. And I can tell you now, Andrew, I'm delighted that win, lose or draw, I'm delighted that our candidates have come under scrutiny and come out squeaky clean. They've maintained their principle, their adherence to the policy vision that we have, and we're playing a long game. It really is about making sure this country gets back on its feet, and you've got to apply principle. You've got to have not just the grievance or the slogans, you've actually got to have some solutions, and we've worked through these very, very strongly. And I just hope that in the fullness of time it will be recognised because our candidates deserve it and Australia deserves it, Andrew.
Kevin Bailey in Victoria. I've got a lot of time for him. Cory Bernardi, thank you so much indeed for your time.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Andrew.